Day 337 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And we'll head over to the Russian military losses as we continue to take a peek at the exhaustion of the Russian forces. And currently, Russia is sitting on 123,860 Russian military personnel liquidations, which represents an addition of 780 in the past 24 hours. And when we take a look at the hardware losses, so 14 tanks, 27 armoured personnel vehicles and 15 artillery. It's actually been a bit of a big day as part of a bigger week for Russian losses. Then we'll move across to the map where I'll start out in a bit of a larger context here. So this is where Russia has performed its latest large wave missile strike attack in many different regions of Ukraine today, including the capital of Kyiv and then also Zaporizhia, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv and Vinnytsia as well. Now the capital of Kyiv, for instance, let's see, so here we go. So 20 missiles alone were fired its way today. Starting fairly early in the morning there too. And here you can see Kyiv residents that moved to the subway shelters away from the attacks to be safe. But Zaporizhia is where they got hit pretty hard. So there was some successful attacks on some energy infrastructure in the oblast. And all in all, Russia launched 55 cruise missiles, of which 47 were shot down, which represents an 85% interception rate, which is marginally higher than the previous recent strikes that were intercepted at a rate of about 76 or 78 to 80% or so there. And there was also a fair number of Russian Shahed, the Iranian produced and provided Shahed drones fired at Ukraine as well. At least 20 or so, for which I don't have the full numbers or interception rate data on that one just yet. And I would venture a guess into saying that this is very likely a response, a Russian response to the West's announcements yesterday of sending in all the tanks to Ukraine. So Russia threw a tantrum. And it's not unexpected, as unfortunate as it is to occur, but we do also see Russian military patterns also forming from all of this. So, for instance, it's been 12 days since their last large wave strike, and before that it was about 14 days. So Russia has gone from about 100 plus large wave missile strikes every half a week or so at the height of things in December to about a once a fortnight now with a smaller barrage of missiles. And this was also to be expected. That is, Russian forces being forced to economize their longer range precision munitions simply because they're running out of them. And economize is their word, not mine. And I'll explain shortly about that too at the end. But suffice it to say, the Russian forces have reminded me time and time again of that Kylo Ren scene from Star Wars, where the antagonist just went wastefully ammunition crazy on Luke Skywalker, only to find out he didn't achieve what he'd set out to. Then I'll briefly move around the map today and we'll have a look at the Donbass, so right here in the south. So Russian forces were repelled near Vodiane, so this is near Avdiivka, so right around here, where there were 3 Russian BMP IFVs, so they're the infantry fighting vehicles, taken out, and at least 3 other armoured vehicles were damaged or destroyed by the Ukrainian army there as well. Then moving down, where Russia pushed a small gain east of Volodar, so I'll just zoom in and we'll take a look here. So we'll open up the date map and we'll see right around here, there we go. And they're doing this as it looks to be a gain that they're looking to make on the high ground footing. So this is where the Ukrainian forces are. It's hard to see, even though this is the topographical map, but this is actually the high end. So what Russia would perceivably like to do is to attempt both a frontal and side attack at the same time. They've been woefully unsuccessful with the frontal attacks quite a number of months now, just failing to do so. So they're sort of trying to flank on the side at the moment. And then somewhere else in the east, somewhere in the Donbass, probably nowhere near the front lines, there appears to be a lot of talk about Russia deploying its latest and greatest, most high-tech T14 Armada tanks to somewhere in the east here. The problem is, they actually only have a handful of these, and the ones they do have are essentially combat ineffective prototypes. Even Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has previously described the production run as only a, quote, experimental industrial batch. So these T14 tanks were meant to be Russia's answer to the German Leopard tank, for instance. But production of these tanks, Armada tanks, has pretty much been at a standstill in many ways for 10 years because of misappropriation of funds through internal military contract corruption that would normally be used to produce these things, instead swallowed up to make some wealthy Russian oligarch even more wealthy. Think yachts, lots of Russian oligarch super yachts. And I've mentioned it all before, but these are simply parade tanks. And that's putting it nicely. They've been known to get towed in Russian parades as well. So no doubt yet another fake propaganda piece in the midst of a real war. Then we'll move across on the map again to Kherson, where Russian forces hit a Turkish cargo boat under the sailing under the Turkish flag, docked at the Kherson port. In fact, 12 Turkish cargo ships have been stuck there since February last year. Now, no one was hurt, but and these boats are actually operated by a Turkish skeleton staff at the moment. But it just goes to show Russia doesn't really know what it's firing at. It's even more problematic when the very thing they hit is from Turkey, which is really another Black Sea country that Russia really needs to be towing the line with. Otherwise, Turkey just might send or start sending and donating more Bayraktar TB2 drones Ukraine's way. Oh, whoops, my mistake. That actually just happened recently now. But also, even more than that, Turkey controls the port into the Black Sea. So here we go. Got a couple of port entrances, really, here and there. And they are actually not letting Russian warships in there. So there, I think it was just a month or two ago, there was a couple of Russian warships stationed somewhere around the Mediterranean Sea. But they'd been there for the previous 9 months of the war and had to just leave and return to a very eastern Russian port. Then we'll move around on the map as well to, let's see, so Belarus. Okay, so the Belarusian army is conducting training with BTR-82 APCs at the firing range near Brest. So let's zoom in for that one. So here we go, Brest, which is close enough to bordering with both Ukraine and Poland, and therefore NATO. No doubt as a show of readiness against Ukraine and NATO there, but it still begs the question, where are the tanks? Where are the Russian tanks coming in droves? Oh, my bad, there's a few T14 Armadas that possibly can be towed to the Donbass. My mistake. Then we'll move across to the news for today, perhaps a few quick tank updates. This might become a regular thing, there's a lot of information that's coming out, so for instance, for the 31 Abrams tanks just announced for Ukraine by the US yesterday, the US said the training should start in weeks as opposed to months. So really fantastic to see there. Right on board with the training schedules for the Leopards tanks as well. And speaking of Germany, so Germany confirms it will send 14 Leopard 2 A6s, so 14 tanks, and allow other partners to re-export some of their own stocks as well, which we already know. And therefore, in terms of pledges from various other countries, we expect to see about 100 NATO-supplied tanks to Ukraine as a starting point. So we're not exactly talking about multiple NATO-sized tank brigades within Ukraine to begin with, but the larger point here is that the floodgates have now been opened for many, many more to be sent to Ukraine and just to trickle in supply as they need them into the future. Then in some other news, the US, again, so recently announced it's upping its artillery production for Ukraine to a factor of 500%. Now, these are for the 155mm NATO standard artillery shells, plus other countries are doing this as well, including Ukraine, naturally. And this comes all at a time where Russia has been forced to start to source some of its artillery munitions from the likes of pariah country North Korea, just a couple of months ago, in fact. Oh, and add to that, Russian Upper Command sent the entire Russian army recently in order to severely economize their ammunitions, which is just yet another example of how the military disparity widens over time between Russia and Ukraine, as Russia cannot support an extended conflict of this magnitude, which is particularly not good for the Russian army. An army whose playbook hasn't changed in almost a century in many ways. So one that's heavily reliant on lots and lots of manpower, and in particular, lots and lots of artillery fire. And then just a bit of a quick a couple of funnies to round it off with today, guys. This is not as extensive a video as I'd like it to be, or really as in-depth for that matter. But for the first funny, so this one's a bit quick. So there's an old PC game from the 1990s titled IM-1A2 Abrams. So this is a game that describes a scenario whereby the US sends Abrams tanks to Ukraine in order to protect them from Russian aggression. Well, what do you know? Then in the second funny today, so some Russian officials blamed American intelligence agencies for providing Ukraine with the hijacking capabilities to hijack the TV signals in Crimea, but also in the Russian oblasts of Belgorod and Krasnodar as well, showing footage of life from a different perspective, a Russian perspective. Now, this is actually about the third time something like this has happened since the middle of last year. So every channel, a refreshing different take on things. And wouldn't it certainly be a welcome change for Crimean residents, for instance, instead of getting all of that Russian propaganda constantly just crammed down their throats, to getting a much more cleaner message, a message they can really sink their teeth into. And the funniest part is, now this type of thing would absolutely annoy Russia so much, because Russia is the type of country that rules by internal propaganda a lot. So to be robbed of that ability isn't going to make their leaders happy one bit. So thanks for watching, guys. Like I said, a little bit of a shorter, less in-depth video today, but yeah, thanks again for your time, your watchings, your views, your likes and comments. I really appreciate all of it to keep going, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.